Awesome. Welcome to Talk About Tatooine. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Nathan.
And we are twin brothers here bringing you what's new in nerddom and give colorful commentary on our favorite subjects. Welcome to our cantina. Grab a drink and settle in as we set course for realities beyond our own.
Woohoo!
Today is a special day. So Star Wars is our main fandom. And we are going to establish where we stand on Star Wars film and TV. And that's either going to make people love us or hate us. Probably both.
A little bit of both. That's okay.
Something I want to talk about, though, before we go into making this tier list is that we are probably going to say some negative things about some of these movies and shows, and we will try to do so in as respectful as way as possible. Please keep in mind that if we say something negative about a movie or show that you really like, we are not saying that you are stupid or your opinion is invalid. A lot of this is subjective, and we don't want to convey the message that, oh, you have to have the same exact opinions as us in order to watch this podcast. We don't want to gatekeep in that way. We really want this to be a place where everyone can be. But with that being said, not all of the Star Wars content is made the same, and these are just our opinions, and we hope that we can have a wonderful discussion on where stuff lies.
Absolutely.
For this tier maker, we're primarily going to be focusing on, obviously, all of the movies. That's an easy one. And then we're going to be focusing on what I would call the main TV shows. So things like behind the scenes. There's a lot of Lego Star Wars
I was
series.
just about to say, where are all the Lego movies? Where are all the Lego shows?
There's a couple other Disney kids shows that we didn't include. The youngest rated shows on here are going to be Rebels and Resistance. And then we also didn't include things like Star Wars Vintage. You're not going to find the holiday special on here. You can't even find it on Disney Plus. So
yeah, for sure.
All right. Shall we get into it?
Let's dive right in. I think the first question we need to ask is, where are we going to start? Are we going to start in chronological order, or are we going to work our way forwards or backwards? Where do you think we should start?
I think we should start. Well, the problem with doing chronological order is, so help me, I might get one of them wrong. I think we can just start wherever.
That's fair. If you guys are taking a look at the screen, it's just a little bit of a different format today. You're not going to see either of us today. So the purpose of today's video is we're actually going to be paring this down so you guys can see the tier maker itself, and you're just going to hear our voices over top because lots of technical issues. But basically, this is what you guys are going to get, and we're going to keep making our product better for you guys. If you guys take a look at the screen, we've got 5 different tiers: Youngling, Padawan, Knight, Master, and Grand Master, starting at the worst and getting to the best, right? You obviously, if you were to put a Knight and Padawan in combat together, the Knight's going to win 10 times out of 10, and that's kind of the whole thing here, is the higher up that list you go, the better the item is. Movie, all of that fun stuff.
Just making a quick note here. My hope for this tier list podcast is that we do it about once a year, adding the new shows and movies that come out. Unfortunately, this next year, we're not really looking at that many new upcoming shows. We're going to get Mandalorian Season 3, The Acolyte, and I think that's it.
Yeah, we're not going to get a ton of extra content. And since those are going to be in additions to, minus The Acolyte, those are all going to be in additions to current series and stuff already. We'll see if that changes their rating at all. We'll get to that when we get there. That's next year's problem.
And then I also chose not to distinguish Mandalorian Season 1 and 2, even though I think they're vastly different. We may want to get more granular at later episodes, but then that also runs the risk of having to get more granular with different seasons of Rebels, different seasons of the Clone Wars, different seasons of pretty much any TV show, because they are fundamentally different from one another.
Absolutely.
I really hope I'm not forgetting anything.
I don't think so. Just kind of looking over this really quick. I say we start with the original first 6 episodes, or I say let's go 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, if that makes sense.
Perfect.
So A New Hope.
Yes.
I actually this is obviously is going to be pretty high for me. The New Hope is one of my favorite movies ever in the Star Wars canon. And I think it does a lot of, just drop it right there in Younglings. That's going to be great. And everyone switches off.
The worst Star Wars movie, said no one ever.
I take it back. This has got to be. So here's the problem. It is really, really good. I have a few pieces of Star Wars cinematic works that are my favorites, which is where I would put things into Grandmaster. So I would easily put this into Master, but I think if you can make a good case for it, I think it can potentially make its way into Grandmaster, because really I think when it comes down to, we're going to be averaging our two opinions together, and that's going to give us kind of the most accurate rating here.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, honestly, yeah, I would agree. A New Hope is going to sit right at the Master level, so that's our second level. I'm going to put it firmly at Master. Quite think it gets to that Grandmaster level, but it's pretty dang close. It's probably my number one for the Master tier so far.
Absolutely, I would agree. And then we get into The Empire Strikes Back. This was fantastic. Now, weirdly enough, I didn't like this one as much as Return of the Jedi, because when I was watching this as a child, so keep in mind that's when we were first watching all these, because we would just rewatch them over and over and over again. I personally disliked movies where the good guys didn't win at the end. And this whole movie, and I know that's like a really stupid thing to hold on to in adulthood, because that's fundamentally, it builds all of the suspense leading into episode 6, which is why I loved episode 6 so much. So I would actually put this in the Master category. It's a fantastic movie, but like, my brain when I was a child was like, no, the good guys didn't win at the end, so why would I like this movie? Even when I was an adult, I'm like, yes, this is excellent TV. So I have that kind of like weird nostalgic trip to get a little bit over, because I know this is, most people would say this is the single best piece of Star Wars cinema to date.
Yeah, I have a similar, I guess, childhood hang up. It's not the same one as yours, but it's still there. The pacing, and there's a lot less action in The Empire Strikes Back. There's a lot of dialogue, and as a child, you're like, why are they talking? Take out your laser swords and start fighting, which is, again, you're totally right. It's a dumb thing to hold on to. At least personally, that's how I view it for me. But as an adult, I really, really like it. And honestly, I do think it belongs in Grandmaster.
You know, I would say, yeah, go for it. I think that's a pretty solid spot for that. And I wouldn't be mad with that being there. I'm not inherently disagreeing with that. So yeah, I think that's a good placement.
So moving on to Return of the Jedi, this is episode 6. This is where I actually really disagree with, I guess, Star Wars fandom as a whole. Because like you said, The Empire Strikes Back is widely considered to be the best Star Wars movie. I like Return of the Jedi better than Empire Strikes Back. Always have, and I still do.
I do as well. You really get to see Luke step into the role of Jedi Knight. I think this easily takes the spot in Grandmaster. The first spot in Grandmaster, I would say. Huge fan of it. And this is also when you get to see Emperor Palpatine for the first time. Like,
yes.
He's like, Darth Vader's there the whole time, but like Emperor Palpatine is like the main baddie, and you're like, oh, we finally get to see him. And he takes such a prominent role in episodes 1, 2, and 3. He's the whole reason the Clone Wars happened, and he just doesn't get any screen time in episodes 4 and 5. Like, he's not even cast in those movies, and it's, I mean, there might be like one scene where Vader might be like talking to him on like a hologram, if I'm correct, but like you barely see him. And then like episode 6, he really shows up, and it's just, it's a great finale for the original trilogy saga.
Well, and episode 6 really has something that I think people really resonated with in The Empire Strikes Back, which is just the desperation of the Rebel Alliance. Like at the very end there, it's not looking good. Death Star 2 is blowing up capital ship after capital ship. Luke is getting his absolute ass handed to him by the Emperor.
Yeah.
And it's only by the intervention of Darth Vader that Luke even makes it, that he overcomes those odds, because he wasn't more powerful than the Emperor. He was more powerful than Vader.
Weirdly enough, like Vader's holding back because he's not trying to kill him, right?
Yeah.
And that could be argued that that's the only reason Luke won that fight.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Really looks pretty dark there at the end. We see the capture of the rebels on the ground kind of all at the same time. I mean, there's like these three, because there's the rebels on the ground, the rebels in space, and then there's Luke on the Death Star. And we see all of these critical things coming to really their darkest moments all at the same time. And you're like, how is this going to work out? And it's not this like, oh, Luke just saves the day on everything. It's the ingenuity of the rebels in space. They hold on and they fight for dear life because of how good of pilots they are. We see the rebels on the ground really fight, and with the help of the indigenous Ewoks, really turn the tide there. And then we also see Luke, and who's able to successfully bring his father back from the dark side.
Yeah.
A man who has spent the previous 2 decades romping around the galaxy murdering Jedi.
Pretty much.
an excellent, excellent conclusion to these trilogy of movies.
One thing I want to add is, this is going to sound silly, but one of the reasons I love episode 4 is Luke's black costume with green lightsaber is a huge aesthetic combo for me. I love how he looks in that movie so much more than episodes 4 and 5, and that's also a big reason where I'm like, oh, this look is great.
For sure. And the like symbolism, like his black outfit shows that he's like still struggling with his relationship with the dark side. And then you see at the very end when the flap on his coat comes undone, you see that it's white on the inside, and then that there's symbolism in that as well, as he finally chooses the light despite the dark being present around him.
For sure. All right, so we've just ranked episodes 4, 5, and 6, all taking very, very prominent spots in the Master and Grandmaster category. Let's move into episodes 1, 2, and 3, Phantom Menace, Clone Wars, and Revenge of the Sith.
All right, the Phantom Menace. Do you want to lead us out on this one?
Oh my gosh, this movie, okay. So this movie has a decent amount of action in it, which made me love it as a child, but then like watching it later in life, I'm like, oh my gosh, the acting is like really bad. It's written not very well, but you get this, it's the next generation of Star Wars movies, and so there's that like excitement. I've got to put this in the Padawan category though, just for me, and for a couple of different reasons. The acting's bad. You get to see the introduction of Anakin Skywalker, you get to see the death of Qui-Gon Jinn, which is really like moving, and so that introduces those characters, but you also see a few different characters enter the scene as well, one of them being Darth Maul. Darth Maul is probably one of my favorite Sith villains, and he's so underrepresented in the movies because they tried really, really hard to basically like give him a second chance in the Clone Wars and Rebels. I think that's super obvious that they were like, he got done really dirty in episode 1, and so he has to take such a prominent role there. But because of that, I would rate this so low, is because they did a really bad job kind of explaining who the bad guys were. Like, yeah, the Trade Federation are bad, whatever. You have some redeeming qualities, like the Duel of the Fates fight scene is probably one of my favorite choreographed, scripted, and the music in it is just fantastic. John Williams is a legend among men. Like, that scene in itself is so fantastic. But then you get like kind of these other weird things where like George Lucas has officially introduced midi-chlorians into the cinematic universe, which I'm sure was in some of the books and stuff, because there was plenty of that in there as well, but like it's not super well explained. So if you hadn't read any of the books, you're like, what the heck is a midi-chlorian? Like, and they don't really cover that all that much, and they just start talking about Anakin as like the chosen one, and you're like supposed to infer that there's a prophecy going on. It's just like there wasn't enough explanation. I would put this pretty low, but some of the fight scenes and action in this movie are some of my favorites. I loved the Battle of Naboo between the Gungans and the droid army. Huge fan of Padme as a character for pretty obvious reasons. Love you, Natalie. I think overall I would put this as Padawan.
I would actually put this at a youngling, and the only thing I think bumps it up to the Padawan level is the Duel of the Fates fight scene. It's the best. It's so good.
It is, yeah. I love that scene.
This is a hard movie for me to watch, to the point where me and some college friends, when we were going through and rewatching all the Star Wars movies, we chose to basically drink our way through them because the first 3 the acting is terrible. The story doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm just going to list off a couple things for the Phantom Menace that I think firmly planted in the youngling category, other than Duel of the Fates. The Trade Federation makes no sense. Padme and Natalie Portman's character, she's supposed to be like 12 or 13 in that episode.
Ooh. So canonically she's 12 or 13, but she looks in her like low 20s.
Yeah, so it's really weird and kind of gross for me to see a person who clearly looks like an adult who is semi-interested in Anakin. Like, she's nice to him. I don't know if she's very romantically interested in him at that point because he is a child, but we know that's where it's going, and it's weird for me.
That is pretty weird,
because she's so young, and Anakin is actually that young. By the time they're actually shown in a romantic relationship, they are both adults, so that's good. It still weirds me out a little bit. Jar Jar Binks, hate him.
And he makes so many appearances in the Clone Wars and all of that. So
the borderline nonsensical politics, they're not good. Hated it. The space battle, it's terrible. It's not great. They went full Death Star with it. They're like, oh look, a bunch of snub-nosed fighters can take out an enemy capital ship with basically, as long as they have a Skywalker, you know?
Well, they're just sticking to the blueprint. I mean, episode 4, episode 6. I'm like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. No, but I get that though.
It's like, okay, we get it. George Lucas really likes this small force against all odds story, but at this point, it's really getting old, and you're going to see that also reflected in my rating of episode 7. We'll get to that in a bit. Here's a question for you. Do you want an answer for, and just take a second to think about it, without what you knew, without your prior knowledge of Star Wars canon and what was going on with the Rule of Two and the Rise of the Sith, who would you say is the Phantom Menace?
I mean, I guess it's kind of implied that it's Darth Maul, but like he's not the one orchestrating this. I mean, it would have to be Sidious at this, who's only shown twice, I think.
Yes, and that's my problem. Is we know that Sidious is the Phantom Menace. He's the one working in the background trying to orchestrate the downfall of the Republic and the Jedi specifically. But the movie's not about him. The title is about him, and we see very little of him. We see him as a senator, but we don't see him orchestrating and plotting and be this rising power in the galaxy. It's sort of alluded to, but like if you forgot who the Emperor was between the release of episode 6 and episode 1, which it was a long time. It was like you're not gonna understand what's going on. You're like, wait, what? Is this guy the same guy as Sidious? Which at that point I don't actually know when we hear Sidious as the name, because in the original trilogy, he is known as Emperor Palpatine, and then we just hear him as Senator Palpatine later. It's not a great movie. The nostalgia really keeps it in my rewatch list, not necessarily because it's a good movie, but because I'm nostalgic for it.
100%. So yeah, I mean, with that, I mean, I would say I have a hard time putting this in the Youngling category, and this is going to make a little bit more sense when we review some of the other movies, is because I think there are much worse than this movie.
Yes.
And I think that in itself, knowing kind of where I'm going to rate some of these other movies, I think it needs to stay in Padawan because it is a step above some of these other movies.
Yeah. All right. Attack of the Clones.
Okay. So Attack of the Clones, even if we're just looking at the movies that we put out so far, it's definitely better than The Phantom Menace, in my opinion, because it's a action-packed movie. Like, I love the introduction of the clones. That is like one of my favorite scenes, is when the clones and Yoda like drop down into the Geonosian arena and they're like, all right, it's time to start blowing stuff up. And then you realize that the campaign against Geonosis the first time was a really big deal, as you saw just so many clones loading in, and you just got these like, and there was like a little bit of mystery in this as well. Obi-Wan Kenobi is doing a little bit of mystery solving, trying to find Jango Fett. Again, could have been better written because you don't get the impression of this being a mystery novel or a mystery movie. Like, there is an element of like, there's a crime to be solved. Half of the plot line is driven by an assassination attempt. The assassination attempt is then quickly overshadowed because then you realize like, oh, a war is about to start, right? Whereas those two aren't directly linked. They're tangentially related, but they're not. Like, the assassination attempt is not directly what causes the war. Like, the separatist movement was going to start anyway, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of poorly woven together, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would put Attack of the Clones higher. I would put it at night for now. It's probably going to be at the low end of night.
I would say it either needs to be at the low end of night or the high end of, because I loved some of the choreography in this movie. Like, you get to see Yoda for the first time, although I know a lot of people actually didn't like Yoda's fighting style. They're like, what is this little green frog doing? And a lot of people didn't like that, but I was like, no, this is cool. Like, we don't get to see a lot of, we didn't get to see a lot of acrobatic. It introduces Count Dooku, which again, I thought he kind of got, like, they do the villains dirty in these first 3 movies because it's a different villain every movie. Yes, Palpatine is the main guy, but it's Darth Maul in episode 1, it's Count Dooku in episode 2, and in episode 3, it's more of General Grievous. Like, Dooku's there, but only for the first 15 minutes because then he gets decapitated. And you're like, okay, like, it just didn't feel like these villains met their end. It just felt like they didn't do enough. Like, I love a good bad guy. Like, I'm like, if the bad guys are well written, I am all for it. I'm like, yes, let's make them as evil as possible, and as, like, you want them to be as imposing as possible. I'll use a obscure example from one of my favorite book series, the Inheritance series. So Aragon, Eldest, Brisingar, and Inheritance. And King Galbatorix is basically the Palpatine equivalent, and they hype him up in those books. And then he finally, meets his end. And that's kind of what we see with Palpatine in episode 6, but it's like all these like sub-villains along the way. You just like felt like they just weren't doing enough. I felt like the Clone Wars, the TV show, did a way better job at like reinforcing how evil these characters were.
Agreed. The villains felt like afterthoughts. Because you're right, the trilogy for 1, 2, and 3 doesn't have a main villain. Palpatine's not. It's hard to say he's a main character really until episode 3.
For sure. Absolutely.
Because then you start to see him come out of the woodwork and things like that. We needed to see that 2 movies ago.
Yeah, they needed to be the actual connection between like, okay, this is the main bad guy and like all of the good he's doing for the side of the Republic, but also every time he turns his back, he's doing evil for the side of the Separatists as well.
That brings me on to episode 3. I think episode 3, it has better writing, slightly better acting, and a good villain. And especially it being really, truly the origin story of Darth Vader. Because then you, like, when you hit that pit of despair, it makes the actual victory in the end so much more sweeter.
Absolutely. My big problem with these first 3 movies, and I would put episode 3 in the night category. I don't think I would, because of the bad acting, I don't feel right about putting it any higher than night. But one of my main problems with episodes 1, 2, and 3 is you could cut out episodes 1 and 2 and completely understand what's happening in 3 as a standalone prequel movie, and it would have done a fine job on its own prequeling episodes 4, 5, and 6.
That is a devastating piece of feedback.
Because Qui-Gon's not mentioned in episodes 2 and 3 almost at all, and so you're like, okay, so he's not playing a big role. You know that he gets married at the end of episode 2, but all of that like hidden relationship is still implied in episode 3, and you actually get to see the like downfall of Anakin. He's just an idiot in episode 2. Like how are you supposed to believe that Anakin, this like bumbling, horny teenager of a Jedi Knight in episode 2, is now going to turn into the general of the Clone Wars series, right? Who he's like a badass, and then somehow gets to where he's at in episode 3. Like, I don't know. I just feel like there's a huge disconnect there, and it's all implied character growth, and we never actually get to see the character growth because he's still super arrogant in episode 3, but what you see in the Clone Wars is totally different. Like he's arrogant, but he's actually skilled, and he's not just like throwing himself at Dooku and then immediately getting shocked into unconsciousness, in that fight scene.
Yeah, he gets his ass kicked. It's embarrassing for him.
So I feel like they don't do a great job at kind of like setting him up as the chosen one, which like then makes his fall even more tragic. But episode 3 does. And episodes 1 and 2, if you hadn't ever watched those, but if you had watched 4, 5, 6, then episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, it would make sense. So sorry to devastate you.
No, that's not devastating for me. That's devastating for George Lucas.
If he listens to this, I would cry and also be so thankful.
We're kind of doing a lot of crapping on George Lucas, but he also created one of the things we love most in life. So
true. Thanks, George.
Thank you, George.
Or Mr. Lucas, because we're not on a first name basis. I don't know. Anyways.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas.
What's your input for episode 3 being in the night category? I
think that's a solid place to put it. Again, yeah. If the acting had been better, I would put it in the Master below A New Hope.
Agreed. 100%.
So far, we've gone through episodes 1 through 6. We have Grandmaster. Our top spot is episode 6, Return of the Jedi, followed by Empire Strikes Back. In the Master category, we have A New Hope. In the Night category, we have Revenge of the Sith. In the Padawan category, we have Attack of the Clones, followed by The Phantom Menace, just for our auditory listeners. All right.
I think it is time to get into the third saga of Star Wars, which is episode 7, 8, and 9. So we're going to start off with The Force Awakens. How about you lead us off with this one?
Youngling.
That was quick. Give me just a quick synopsis of why you would say this is Youngling.
I like the character of Rey. I like the character of Kylo Ren. I don't like what they did. so much of The Force Awakens is literally just rewriting A New Hope, which is not what we needed. And I put it in the youngling category because I legitimately remember thinking, when we went to go see this, it was, I think, you, me, our other brother, and Dad. And I remember coming out of the theater and I thought, that was boring. I was bored by it.
Here's the thing. I'm immediately biased whenever I see something in the movie theaters. I will say it is much better than I actually realize it is every single time I watch a movie, because of the viewing experience. So I'm not an objective source of review material. When I see something, I'm like, you need to let me sit with it for like a week, maybe watch it a second time, and then I will have a more accurate opinion. Because I was like, oh, that was awesome. And then everyone just started like bashing on it. And these were all things I didn't even think of. And I was like, okay, all right. And that was actually a moment when I realized like, oh my gosh, I am biased when I come out of movie theater. I'm going to like it pretty much everything I watch. I would say this is in the youngling category as well. It is a remake of the major plot points from A New Hope, which is really sucky. I didn't like the characters they start off with. I thought, as somebody who really, really enjoyed the Star Wars canon that had now been made into Legends, this movie was almost an abomination, because we had just gotten over the fact that like when Disney bought Star Wars and they were like, hey, everything that's considered Legends now is no longer canon. That was something that was hard for me to go out of. And the New Republic is completely absent from The Force Awakens. It's present only in the one scene where you see the laser from the new Death Star, or sorry, Star Killer base, which is the same thing, come in and destroy them. And you're like, oh, so the Resistance is not an actual, it's not part of the New Republic, but it has all these New Republic figures and all these people who worked really hard to set up the New Republic. And like, for some reason, Luke Skywalker is like not even in the movie. He's just like an afterthought, which is stupid. Leia takes a really like, she gets done dirty in this, because now she's literally taking a step back into her earlier role of like, she just did all of that rebelling just to be another rebel again. And they're like, oh, but no, they're resistance fighters. And I'm like, call it what you will, but it's the same organization, but much more poorly funded. The New Republic doesn't want anything to do with them, so they don't even like get that. For some reason, the New Republic is like, hey, by the way, we decided not to have a military because we didn't want to be the Empire. And then the First Order is like, oh, cool. Well, we still have ships, so we're going to kill you all. And you're like, okay, I get that they didn't want to be the Empire, but like, then whoever made the writing decision that like this was going to be some sort of like pacifist government organization that somehow holds the galaxy together up until that point, I'm like, no, that's not believable at all. Not at all.
And that's definitely the way it's portrayed in the movie, is that the New Republic is just kind of a wet noodle of an organization that can't really get anything done. Like, this is the same people who toppled the Empire. I understand not wanting to just be a replacement of the Empire. There has to be something there, you know? Full-on pacifism doesn't make a lot of sense in this case, and some of the books do retcon that a little bit. They retcon it in a way to say, oh, the New Republic just didn't have a centralized military. But again, from watching the movies, you have no idea. They're completely absent. We see all of this hard work from 4, 5, and 6, and we don't get the payout. We don't get to see the good things that happen.
Yeah, it took them one generation, like 1 or 2 generations, I guess, to basically lose all of the progress they had. And they do go through like, oh yeah, there's like, we're just a decentralized military and blah, blah, blah. But then you're like, okay, so where are all these like planetary defense forces? Why did all these planets just get blown up and nobody stood up to the First Order? Like, if they're going to have a big military, why was like something not signed into effect? Like, hey, we need to deal with this problem because now we have this Empire remnant that like just got to frolic around and build a huge new Death Star. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, because the First Order is not an unknown quantity by the time The Force Awakens comes out. The New Republic is aware of them. Why? Because they're stealing children for their new Stormtrooper Corps. That's how we get Finn. He's just like abducted and taken and forced into conscription. We know they're out there. You can't build that massive of a project and not notice.
So yeah, it's got to be in youngling category. I will say one redeeming part about the movie is the X-Wing scene. I thought it was really well done. when
Yes.
that was one of my favorite moments because the music is on point. The X-Wing skimming over the surface of the water is awesome. You don't get to see a lot of atmospheric combat for X-Wings, and I just thought that was absolutely like just super cool. And the problem is like you don't like the rest of the movie doesn't have that rule of cool in it. That is like a little bit, but like that's not redeeming enough to put it up into the Padawan category, in my opinion.
I agree. That moment was really awesome, and I really appreciate you for bringing some positivity to this conversation. I think that's something we should make sure to do going forward. That's a good reminder for me to be positive and negative.
That's what I'm here for. Next episode, episode 8. This one was really rough because you get to see a lot more of Rey and Kylo's like competitive relationship going on, and Rey really struggles with like learning how to be a Jedi, and you get to see Luke a lot more. The bummer part is that you get a lot of inconsistencies in this movie with like how easy the First Order is overpowered. For example, in the opening scene when a small flight of bombers basically takes out like their big ship, and then we have the whole Holdo maneuver, which has to immediately get retconned because they're like, okay, well, if this resistance faction can just throw ships at everything at light speed and just like basically create a mass accelerator cannon using your ships, why haven't they been doing that the entire time? Because physics say you could basically take a Home One size capital ship, put it into light speed, and you could have just destroyed Starkiller Base with a minimal amount of like loss of life. And also probably Saw Gerrera would have been doing that the entire time, right? Like if that was working, like you would have gotten the organizations like that just being like, oh yeah, we just started flying ships into Imperial worlds and it worked. Like forces mass times acceleration, and when you're going several times the speed of light, you have a lot of acceleration even if you only have a little bit of mass. It's basically the idea of just shooting a bullet at something. So I would say this puts into the youngling category because they did have to go through and retcon so much from this, and not a lot from this movie stood out. So for example, when the like walkers get down to the salt planet, I'm like, okay, this is Empire Strikes Back, but the script is like written in reverse order, right? The rebels get chased to their base, and then they're like, oh, we need to hold out here, and then like all the resistance fighters die, and so you're like, okay, how are they gonna get anything done in episode 9? You're not really sure. There was a few scenes that didn't make sense in this movie. Mostly anytime Finn interacts with Rey, they're hinting at like there being like a romantic relationship between 7 and 8, and then nothing ever comes of that. And you're like, okay, that's kind of weird. A lot of people, how it's advertised, especially in episode 7, is Finn's totally a Jedi. Because like there's several posters of him holding that lightsaber, and then he just doesn't. It's very weird. I mean, if we look at the youngling category right now in The Force Awakens, who's holding the blue lightsaber right now?
It is Finn.
Exactly. So you're like,
yeah. And I know I said we wouldn't rate any of the Lego movies, but in the Lego Holiday Special, Finn is confirmed to be a Jedi. That's not canon, but he's like training with Rey.
Interesting. Okay.
So I would put The Last Jedi at the end of the youngling category, and my reason being is that it shows a clear disconnect between the different directors of where this trilogy was going. What's his face? The director for Last Jedi.
Rian Johnson.
He watched The Force Awakens, and he's like, I don't really like any of that, so I'm going to do my own thing. And we see that literally from like the first moment. Because like Rey gives Luke his lightsaber, and then he just like tosses it over a cliff. And then like in episode 9, we see a Jedi's weapon should be treated with more respect. It's like, it's literally the directors are fighting on screen. And like, how hard is it to just make a storyboard for 3 movies? I know it's probably really hard because I'm not in the cinema industry, but it's like, that's your guys' job, is to agree. You guys already knew you were going to make 3 movies, and you made 3 distinct movies.
3 separate movies that happen to share the main plot.
And barely. I would put The Last Jedi in the very last spot.
Yeah.
There is nothing on this list that will be, in my opinion, voted lower than The Last Jedi. I didn't like it. And I just said I would say something positive. So I am going to say something positive. I love Kylo Ren's story arc. I think he's a great villain. They had the same villain for 3 movies, which episodes 1, 2, and 3 didn't. 4, 5, and 6 did. He's a strong Adam Driver. It honestly is really strong point in 7, 8, and 9.
And the nice thing is you get to see his badassery level up in episode 8 because he kills Snoke, which was hilarious because when episode 7 came out, there was so much speculation on who Snoke was, all these different things. And then like episode 8 rolls around. Oh yeah, he's dead now. And I remember watching so many speculation and theory videos on who that is. And then Kylo Ren's like, nah, dude, like I want to take your spot. And you're like, that was a baller move, dude. For like for not explicitly saying you're a Sith, that has big Sith energy. And big Sith energy. And that really leveled up his character in that series of franchise. So absolutely, Adam Driver, we love you. You did such a good job.
It's good soup.
All right, let's go into the last one. So, The Rise of Skywalker. I would actually put this, I liked this much more than the other 2 movies. It's very obviously, like the pace of this movie is so quick. There's like no scene I felt like that lasted more than a couple of minutes. There were no settings that lasted more than a couple of minutes because
they had so much ground to cover.
They did.
After they basically went nowhere with episode 8, they're like, oh boy, we really got to pick this up.
And again, and the writers for that, I'm like, the writers and the director, I'm like, you guys had to retcon so much from episode 8 to episode 9, and they did an okay job at it. But the problem was like, as the viewer, you knew that was what was happening. Like, okay, episode 8 was terrible, so they're just trying to set the record straight. And it was like almost like you similar to how Harry Potter did Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, you almost kind of hoped like, okay, was that Part 1 and now we're going to get a Part 2 later? Like, so you guys fixed everything in Part 1 and then like resolved the story in Part 2 maybe? The Return of Palpatine, I thought was pretty cool. I think there was a little bit of recycling of old characters, but it felt like it was an homage to the Legends canon that Palpatine had clones. The problem with that is that if you didn't read any of the Legends canon super carefully, you would have never known that, and it kind of felt like lazy writing. But if you did know that, you were like, oh, that's cool. It could have been like a Palpatine clone, which it kind of was. I liked that they went into a little bit more like Sith sorcery, and so I would probably put this in the Padawan category.
I would put it at the Padawan category at the very end below episode 1.
I would agree with that. It's not going to have the nostalgia factor to quite climb its way out of that.
I for sure thought the whole Palpatine Returns thing is lazy writing, and the memes for that just slapped. So funny. I did like it more than episode 8 because I did feel like it had a more cohesive story with episode 7, which just makes it a more compelling movie. Like, you want to see where characters are going. And I want to say this for episode 7, 8, and 9. So we come with a heavy bias. We were really into a lot of the more obscure Star Wars lore growing up because we read a lot of the books,
the games, all that stuff.
A little bit more Star Wars awareness than probably the average user. And I will say that 7, 8, and 9 has really captivated a new generation of Star Wars fans, and I will never be upset about that.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely did.
Enjoy Star Wars with is always a good thing.
All right, let's get into, I would say, let's finish up the kind of anthology movies, and then we get into the series. How about that? Let's go over, I think the next one to come out was Solo, correct?
Was it Solo or Rogue One?
Let's do Solo.
Solo, I would put it between 1 and 2, episodes 1 and 2 in the Padawan category.
I would agree. Here's the thing. If I'm looking at this at rewatchability being my main factor that's going to bring me back, I would rewatch The Rise of Skywalker before I would rewatch Solo.
Devastating.
This was a boring movie. I thought they did Han Solo dirty in this movie. I think some of its like redemptive qualities was like you got to see like him and Chewie meet and like them start to develop their relationship. You got to see Darth Maul sort of show up a little bit as like a crime boss, and you're like, oh yeah, let's go. So it does have some redeeming factors in it. Absolutely. Some pretty cool armor with like the snow, or not the snow troopers, but the range troopers. I thought those were really cool. Costume designs, things like that. But I thought Han Solo in this movie was boring.
So yeah, you would put it even below episode 9.
I have only watched this movie once, and I have not chosen to watch it again.
Man, I feel like that we should put it in the youngling category then. Because yeah, you're right. I have no desire to rewatch it. And like what you said, like I have watched The Rise of Skywalker willingly, and I have not rewatched Solo. Frankly, I almost forgot about it. I almost didn't put it on this list at all because it was forgettable.
Well, and I've actually, if we're going by rewatchability, I've watched all of the third trilogy multiple times, and I have again only watched Solo a singular time. But again, Solo as a standalone movie doesn't have the like director's inconsistency between 7 and 8, so I would say probably higher on the youngling category. Rogue One coming up next.
Rogue One is my all-time favorite Star Wars movie.
Yeah, it's pretty freaking good. I loved the casting in this. The Tarkin was phenomenal to watch. Mm-hmm. Like just being able to see like the Death Star really get to like be put through his paces was fantastic. At first, this is going to sound kind of hilarious because I love Andor as a series. At first, I didn't like Cassian's character. I thought he was like kind of annoying at first because he's like this rebel, sort of a rebel assassin, but kind of more of a rebel operative. And like Jyn is like trying to like join up with the rebellion and like do good things and like save her father and things like that. And I'm like, why, who's this Cassian dude? Just like getting in the way. And then you realize you're like, oh, he's like super important. But yeah, this would definitely make its way into Grandmaster. I would have a hard time saying this isn't. The only place where I think I differ with you on how good this movie actually was I wouldn't say this is my all-time favorite Star Wars content.
Okay, so I would put it here. Where would you put it? Find the average.
I've rewatched. If I'm looking at rewatchability being my main deciding factor here, I think it's correct in its place, but I will probably argue later to put a few things above that.
Okay.
The next movie, the last movie actually that we have on this list is the Clone Wars movie.
Yeah, I would put the Clone Wars movie in the Night category below Episode 3.
Ooh, interesting. I would put it in the Night category, but above Episode 3, because I really liked this movie, but not obviously as much as I liked New Hope, not even close. But I loved the direction that this was going, and this set me up to have good expectations for the Clone Wars series.
The only reason I would put it below Episode 3 is because of how annoying Ahsoka is.
That is a good point. She's super annoying in this movie.
She was not a liked character to begin with.
Yeah, they successfully redeemed her character, making her probably one of the most beloved Star Wars characters to date, but her first appearance was not great.
So with that, would you still keep it above Episode 3?
You know, with that, I would say below, yeah. Because the annoyance of young Ahsoka was like pretty bad.
Yeah.
But I did love getting to see a little bit more interaction. I like the clones are probably like my favorite faction in Star Wars, like the clone army itself. So huge fan. All right, now we're getting into series. We've got some really good stuff in here. But I say we just, each of us kind of alternate between picking a series and placing. So I'll have you go first.
Let's pick Star Wars Resistance. Have you watched this?
Oh, I tried really hard to watch this, which keep in mind, Star Wars Resistance it's for children. And
it's for children. It is a Y7 rating.
Yeah. So it's made for a super young audience. And because of that, I could not enjoy it at all. It's got to, for me, it would have to be at either the top of the youngling category or the bottom of the Padawan category.
Interesting.
Because I couldn't get behind the characters. I was just like annoyed the entire time. And I didn't watch the whole thing. So like give my opinion on this much less weight than yours. Because I only watched the first season. I couldn't do it. I tried and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. Like, I just couldn't do it.
Yeah. So I actually really enjoyed watching it. Not enough to where I would rewatch it. However, we see the emotional impact of the firing of Starkiller Base in real time. The kind of space station that the characters are on, they basically live broadcast the firing of Starkiller Base. And it's very emotional for the main character. I would say more so emotional than the actual Force Awakens. So I would actually put this below the Clone Wars movie.
In the Night category?
In the Night category. But then after averaging it with your score, it would probably be below. Well, it probably would be at the end of the Padawan category.
I would say, again, give me a little bit of less weight on this one because I didn't watch the whole series.
It doesn't have a lot of rewatch value. So I'm pretty comfortable putting it at the end of the Padawan category, in my opinion. This is all our opinion.
I'll take it. I'll take it. That is a good average between the two. Next one, I'm going to pick Star Wars Visions. This was a kind of an interesting dive into different art styles for Star Wars, which I thought was pretty good. It was very interesting seeing what they were allowing to be created with different styles of art and music and cinematography and things like that in an animated form. I think I liked that on its premise. The problem is I really don't like anime, and so that was like a big turn off for me, and I will probably never watch Visions again. This would have to be in probably like low to mid youngling category for me.
So I very much agree. It seems that anime is like black licorice. You either love it or you hate it. There's not really a lot of in between, because it has this the way anime characters are typically acted out, they're very like, I'm about to be super stereotypical, but they're, at least in Visions, they're like, yeah, let's do it. This very like chipper attitude, and I can't even think of the word, because it's like you only really see this style of like voice acting in anime, and it's not for me.
No, it's like not. Really it's not for me either.
And I would put it at the bottom of the youngling category. I'm never going to rewatch it, and I really had a hard time finishing it at all.
I did too. Yeah, right. You get to pick the next one.
All right, let's do Andor.
This is my favorite Star Wars content to date so far. Like, the amount of storytelling and suspense that we got in just 12 episodes, which I know is like 3 movies worth of time, but this is one of my favorites, and I felt like they did so much character and story development across so many different planets and story arcs. I mean, we've done 3 out of our 4 reviews for Andor's episode so far, and we're going to do another one as our next episode too, and I have nothing but good things to say about Andor.
I have very few gripes about Andor, and a lot of the criticisms I have are really not even all that important. I know on Twitter, like, a bunch of people were getting upset because there was like screws in Star Wars, and they're like, Star Wars doesn't have screws, which is just not true.
Yeah, why would Star Wars not have screws?
I have no idea. I truly don't understand Star Wars Twitter sometimes. I'm like, what are you all angry about this time? It doesn't even make any sense.
To be fair, Star Wars Twitter is the loudest part of like the Star Wars fandom, even though it represents such a small chunk. And that's what you have to remember about Twitter is like, yeah, like hardly anyone uses Twitter when you look at social media as a whole, but it's so loud and everyone looks at it to be loud. So, and then they just assume, oh yeah, that's what everyone else is thinking, when it's really not.
It's not. It's the vocal minority.
Exactly. For our next one, I'm going to pick actually another one of my favorites, which is the Clone Wars TV show. I have watched this more than any other Star Wars content. This is something I actually put on a yearly loop. I watch this at least once a year. This is one of my favorite series. I would put this in the Grandmaster category. And I have a hard time putting an animated series above live action, but it's so well done. Like, the voice actors did such a good job, and it just brought to life so many new characters. I would have to put this, oh man, I might get some flack for this. I would have to put this above episode 6.
Okay, interesting. I think this belongs in the youngling category. I'm totally kidding.
And Nathan signs off with that, everybody. Episode's done.
Nathan has left the chat. I think it belongs at the top of the master category.
All right, I'd love to hear why. Because of its rewatch value, I love it, but I will acknowledge that this one gets better as the season goes on. Its first few seasons weren't as good as its last few.
And that is really why I put it only in the master category, is because there are some filler episodes. Honestly, there are some episodes that I just straight up skip. It's not a 100% banger.
That's a good assessment.
The droid episodes, I skip them. I immediately skip them. A Jar Jar led episode, gone. I'm skipping it right away. Life is too short to rewatch Jar Jar over and over again.
That is fair. And it's like, what, the second or third episode is a Jar Jar episode of season 1, something like that? Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah, the droid episodes are very boring.
And which is really interesting because, especially the droid episode with Colonel Gascon, the little snail dude, there's an interview of George Lucas saying that is his favorite episode of Clone Wars. And I'm like, that's my least favorite episode of Clone Wars.
George, what are you doing? The dude made
Yeah.
the most exciting series that we have known to, like, the most exciting IP that we enjoy, and yet the dude is an absolute loser in his like own opinions. Like, come on, man. What are you doing?
And he's like, this is the best one. I'm like, that's probably universally the lowest rated episode. Other than the one where like R2 goes to the spa and C3PO is kidnapped, that one is 1 star. So boring for me.
I mean, it is a
So,
kid's show. At the end of the day, it is a kid's
It
show.
is a kid's show. The end isn't really a kid's show.
Yeah, for sure. That last season, the kind of their finale season, you're like, yeah, this is made as if all of the kids have continued to grow up and they are shooting for the older, like young teenagers at that point. They're shooting for this to be a little bit PG-13.
Would you still keep it in the Grandmaster or bump it down to Master?
I could agree that it could be bumped down to Master with the episodes that you skip. It has a few episodes that are of the same skippability of Scott's Tots from The Office. So.
Okay, so real quick, just to re-summarize what we're going through for our listeners who don't have the video portion of our podcast, what we're looking at so far is in Grandmaster rank, we have Andor, Rogue One, Episode 6, and Episode 5. In the Master categories, we have the Clone Wars TV show, followed by A New Hope, for Episode 4. In the Night category, we have Episode 3, followed by the Clone Wars movie. In the Padawan category, we have Episode 2, Episode 1, Episode 9, and then Star Wars Resistance. And then in the Youngling category, we have Solo, Episode 7, Episode 8, and then Visions in last place. Tales of the Jedi. I would put it above the Clone Wars movie.
I would actually agree with that. I'm really enjoying it so far. But as standalone series, the whole premise of Tales of the Jedi is all of it is filler, which is kind of stinks. But it's filling in the gaps in lore pieces, which I really, really enjoy.
Yes.
But it's also like it's supposed to be each episode is standalone. For the most part, there's a little bit of a story arc with Count Dooku as a Jedi, and you kind of see his fall a little bit in his distrust with the Republic. But that's also like kind of known already. But it's good. But I wouldn't feel good about putting it in the Master category.
Yeah, I agree. And my only criticism of it is that it's too short.
Agreed.
The episodes are really good, but they're only like 10 or 15 minutes long a piece. And it's like, excuse me. More, please.
More, please. Exactly. Let's do the Bad Batch next. I have some interesting opinions on the Bad Batch. I would put this in the Night category. I felt like the Bad Batch's introduction in the Star Wars Clone Wars in Season 7 set the Bad Batch up to be way cooler than it was, and I didn't like the progression of Crosshair being a bad guy. I thought that was kind of dumb. I thought the whole Bad Batch was going to like stick together, and for so far what we've seen, we don't really get a resolution to his character arc yet, and that just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But overall, I like the Bad Batch. Omega's kind of annoying, especially because they're like, oh, we should probably have a female clone. And I'm like, okay, like I don't know. I felt like that was a little bit of pandering, and I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for that. But I liked that they named her Omega. She's the last clone. Like, if you don't know anything about the Greek alphabet, Omega is the last letter in the alphabet. Yeah, Omega. But, like, she's not that good at fighting yet. Like, she knows how to shoot her, like, crossbow thing.
She's like an active hindrance to the team.
Well, and I'm like, she's a clone, she's a female, but like they didn't make her a badass that I wanted her to be. And I'm like, wait, like you guys, I felt like they added her in to be inclusive, but then made her like a not likable character, which was kind of annoying. I'm like, why didn't they make her a badass? Like, why didn't they make her really, really good at her skills? If she's a clone and she can flash learn all these things, why isn't she really good at fighting or like doing anything like tech related? She's just kind of like along for the ride, I guess.
In a team full of specialists, she has no specialty.
Yeah, I thought that was a disservice. I'm like, if you wanted more female representation in Star Wars, like I felt like Omega didn't do a good job at that.
Yeah, I'm really hoping they give her the Ahsoka treatment because, like I said, I think inclusion is very important. I think diversity is extremely important. It's not just a box to check. It's an actual like exchanging of ideas and ways of life and really getting perspective on things. And that being said, like having strong female characters is just good for Star Wars. So having a character who's annoying isn't great. And I want like little girls who are growing up watching Star Wars to be able to relate to Omega, and honestly, she's not that relatable. I'm really thankful that Ahsoka is who she is because she's awesome. She's
Again,
so
arguably one of the most loved characters in Star Wars lore.
Yeah,
For sure. All right, go ahead and pick our next one.
Book of Boba Fett.
Ooh, okay. So I like Boba Fett as a character, but man, where would I put this? I would put this in the Night category. I would feel dirty putting this any lower than Night, but I wouldn't feel good about putting it in Master. I wanted more episodes, but there was just
Where in the Night category?
I would put it higher. I would actually probably put this the highest in the Night category so far because I did like Boba Fett's character. You get to see kind of some more seedier parts of the Outer Rim, and you get to see kind of more of the crime side. There's not a lot of Jedi in it, which again I'm a fan of. I think like we have so much Star Wars content, and most of it revolves around Jedi. I'm like, give the normies a shot too. And I do have a little bit of a nerd boner for Mandalorians, so there's that as well. I felt less excited about the constant overlap between Mando and Boba Fett. I felt like I wanted them to be more separate than they were, and I had a little bit of an issue with that. But overall, really good watchability. I think I've watched through this 2 or 3 times, whether or not that's in the background or direct watching. I really like it. I really wish they didn't bring Mando's character back in. I love Ming-Na Wen, who plays Fennec Shand. I love her character from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and other things she plays. She's always a badass, and she's always one of my favorites. So I'm actually really happy they brought her in. She's a fantastic character choice for Shand. So I really, really like that. Women can be assassins too. And she always does such a good job at that.
She does such a good job. She's legit. Everything she is in, I love.
Absolutely. I really loved Book of Boba Fett, but again, something wouldn't settle well with me putting this in the Master category.
I would put it actually at the bottom end of either the top of the Padawan category or the bottom end of the Night category.
Interesting. Why so?
It was boring. I didn't like what they did with the Tuskens. They did them dirty. They personified them and they gave them for lack of a better words, humanity. And then they're just like, oh, by the way, they're dead. Like, they didn't even give them an on-screen death, and that was hurtful. The action in Book of Boba Fett made absolutely zero sense. It was very poorly directed action. Chrysanthemum was really cool, but like...
He's very cool, but also doesn't do a ton.
Yeah. So there are things that I like, there are things that I don't like, but there was a lot more things I didn't like.
Fair enough.
I would put it at the bottom of the Night category, and then averaging our 2 opinions, it would actually end up right here.
Yeah, I like that.
Let's see. Let's talk about Kenobi.
I had a little bit of mixed feelings on Kenobi. I felt like Kenobi got so overshadowed by Andor, because I felt like they came out pretty close to each other in the grand scheme of things. And I loved Andor so much more than Kenobi. And I've never rewatched any of the episodes there, but I love Ewan McGregor. He's so good. So I feel really conflicted about this one. And it makes me want to put this at Night just because I have good and negative feelings about it. But I felt like the plotline itself was kind of slow. I wanted more to be happening. I loved the interactions between him and Darth Vader. I thought those were really, really cool, especially that moment when Darth Vader basically drags him across the coals. How do you like it? I thought that was a really evil thing to do, and you know how I like good villains. I'm just man, it came out too close to Andor because Andor was so good, and I'm oh, Kenobi wasn't that good, but it was. Yeah, but I liked it. So I'd have to put this in the Night category. I liked it more than Book of Boba Fett. Did I like it more than Tales of the Jedi? I think I did like it more than Tales of the Jedi.
Did you like it more than Episode 3?
That's where I struggle, because I don't think I would necessarily put it at the top of the Night category. But
so its current placement...
Yeah, I think its current placement is pretty good. There you go. Hey, look at that. Nailed it.
I have a lot of similar feelings. Again, the action, the non-lightsaber combat, I should say, in Kenobi could have been better. Some of the combat choreography... struggles, but I think it firmly belongs in the Night category.
Agreed. All right, and then we get into I say we do Mando next. Do our last live action piece. Oof. Okay. Mandalore has some filler episodes for sure.
Yep.
Which automatically drops it out of the rank of Master for me.
Really interesting.
Actually, I'm trying to think, because I have rewatched Mando. Like, I rewatched Mando almost immediately, and I do love a lot of the characters in there. You know what? Actually, I would put this at the bottom end of Master. I like this better than Revenge of the Sith. I haven't had the time to rewatch it as many times because Revenge of the Sith's been out way longer. But I liked like the characters they introduced. I love the role that Ahsoka has gotten to play in Mando so far. And again, I do have a big nerd boner for Mandalorian, but I really didn't like the crossplay between Boba Fett and Mando. I thought that kind of did it dirty a little bit because I felt like it distracted from Jin as a character. But man, that fight scene with all the dark troopers, that really gets the tension up. That is good Star Wars right there. And then the entrance of Luke, and I know everyone like kind of freaks out on his face and stuff like that. I really like Grogu as a character. I'm excited to see him grow more, but it leaves me with a few different questions of like the technicalities of Yoda's species. But overall, I would definitely have to say I have many more positive feelings of Mando than I do negative. And it does have a lot of rewatchability, which I really like. And I really like a lot of the different missions he goes on. I think they're pretty fun.
I agree with its placement at the bottom end of Master. I would put it firmly in Grandmaster if the second season hadn't been so much better than the first.
Yeah, agreed, for sure.
Because there's only like one filler episode in season 2, and like half of season 1 is filler, it felt like.
That is true. Last one, we got Star Wars Rebels. Where would you put this?
I've rewatched Star Wars Rebels at least 3 times through. I put it in the Master category below Mandalorian. I
actually would agree. Almost completely, because again, it does have the presence of filler episodes. There are some characters in that show that I do kind of, or some episodes that I find a little bit annoying, but this was a really, really good mix of adding in lore of the Jedi Order in its broken state. I really liked that. You fall in love with Kanan's character, and it gets into a little, just like Clone Wars did in a couple of episodes, it gets into some of the mysticism, like the Force and things like that. It revolves around so many different characters that it just has so much life to it. And there's not really an unlikable character in the Rebels squad. And they're big galactic players by the end of it. And I do love that in The Rise of Skywalker, you do get to see the Ghost fly into the Exegol system.
Yes.
I was like, yes.
This is what the people want.
Yeah. Hera and Sabine are both really compelling characters for me. I think Zeb and Chopper are the least compelling for me. I know Ezra's technically like the primary character, but I really liked... You don't get to see a lot of like alien species like lore. You mostly just see, we're going to give lore of the Jedi and different planets, but like you get to dive into Twi'lek culture quite a bit, and I actually really enjoyed that, along with a few episodes on Garazeb as well. But Kanan's character is like kind of obnoxious because he's trying to be a master a little bit, but you learn to love him so quickly. And then his demise in the last season was heartbreaking.
It was really gutsy for them to kill off a main character. It was a strong storytelling point. It really develops the characters a lot.
Absolutely.
We were better as the viewers for it, even though, broke our hearts.
For sure. All right, guys, we have put almost every Star Wars title up onto this. I don't think we missed any, but if we did, let us know here, guys, although we did choose to omit a few like the Legos and the holiday special. So if you guys agree, let us know. If you guys have differing opinions, or if you're like, hey, this scene in this movie maybe warrants a better category ranking, we'd actually love to hear about it. We might even post this list itself to our Twitter. We'll see. But thank you guys so much for listening. We've taken up a decent amount of your time already, so we're going to do our outro and then get out of this one. Thank you guys so much for listening in. The best way to support us is to just listen to our content, like, subscribe, leave comments, things like that. With that tier list, we'd love to get some of your guys' input on it as well, because we covered a lot of stuff. And there's 5 different categories, and there was at least 4 per each category, so we reviewed 22 titles of Star Wars. That's quite a bit, and that's not even going into the detail of like breaking apart each season, which who knows, we might have the time to do that as well. We do plan on doing this yearly, so we're going to be adding different shows like The Acolyte, Ahsoka, and then like we'll kind of change the rankings for things, especially like when Mando Season 3 comes out, whenever the next season of Book of Boba Fett, all those fun things, and potentially when they add more Star Wars movies as well. So we'd love to get that on there. Remember, guys, if you guys want to hear about different topics, just let us know on Twitter. Follow us at Talk Tatooine there. If you guys want to see this in video format, you guys can catch us on YouTube. If you guys want to catch this in just audio format, you can follow us on Anchor, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, wherever you guys listen there as well. And we're there at Talk About Tatooine. We look forward to hearing from you guys. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
Close your eyes.